So I'd like to turn to what's happening in our nation and also in Sarasota in terms of, the death of George Floyd, and all the events leading up to it have led to this tipping point in the United States, and understanding that there's a need for reform with the police. I think the majority of the country is coming to understand, and certainly what happened to Mr. Floyd, but by a police officer killing him, was, I think, well, it was a horrible thing, obviously, but it's kind of woken the nation up. So I want to ask you, a week prior to that, we had a Sarasota police officer on video also using his knee to detain someone who was being arrested, a Black man. And there have been complaints over the years about excessive force with our local police. So, as city commissioners for District 2, what kind of a role would you see? How would you want to address this concern, which people are protesting about here in our city?
All right. So, I mean, you asked a specific question about the incident in Sarasota. First off, Jerry's father was a cop. My oldest son is a deputy sheriff in the county. I saw that video of what happened in Sarasota. I also saw the helicopter video from a different angle, different perspective, which showed what happened before as opposed to just what happened in that particular moment. And it really was nothing even remotely close to the George Floyd incident. Of course, it happened before the George Floyd incident as well. And there was a reason why the chief, when she first saw that incident report, dismissed it as justifiable. Because when you see the camera from the helicopter, you'll see that it actually was. Coming back to that, though, of course, what happened with George Floyd was terrible. Terrible things happen everywhere. 1,635 miles away. It's 2 or 3 people that participated, and particularly one that was doing it. I know what Jerry says about being treated nicely by police. I am too, partly because of my son, but partly because I'm middle class and everything else. I'm a realistic person. When Stevie Wonder said famously, what's it like to be born blind? And he said, well, it's a lot better than being born black. I think, that's a very profound statement. I think it's true. I don't know what it's like to be a young black man. When I was a young man in London as a kid playing soccer, quite a few of the kids that I played with were black. And when I used to walk out of the stadium with them to the bus or the train, I know we got treated differently, and a way that I didn't get treated when I was on my own. So I have a lot of sympathy for it. The answer is not in obviously defunding or going to no-go zones. The answer is, though, in trying to make sure that we listen, we hear, and we recognize that, one of the basic principles, whether you're black or white, is that resisting arrest always leads to bad things. You can argue the toss, you've got due process, but struggling when someone puts cuffs on you does have the potential, because the cops are entitled to defend themselves. And whilst that isn't what happened with George Floyd, 58,000 assaults on police officers in the United States last year, 18,000 bodily injuries. That's an awful lot more than happened to suspects. So you got to understand, these people are paid not an awful lot of money, and they're not, frankly, paid to get beaten up. So I can see both sides of the argument. I think we have to have a conversation, but it has to be an honest conversation, and recognize that as much as police officers have a responsibility, citizens do too.
Okay, and just to follow up, I also watched the helicopter footage. I think from the helicopter, it wasn't clear that the suspect was being detained with a knee, and I think that Bernadette Tapino has acknowledged, as I think all police departments across the United States, that is not something they get trained to do. And the other piece is...
Well, that's not true.
Well, hang on, because I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond to me.
Sure.
But the other piece is, I don't think that white families have talks with their sons about, basically what the Black community is saying is, we're afraid to call the police, and we're afraid to call the police because we may wind up getting hurt. So I guess I'll give you the opportunity to respond, but I also want to, because the defund police movement now it's very confusing. I don't think they're communicating very well, but what the defunding is not necessarily, some are saying abolish, but others are saying, well, we want a reallocation of resources. So the Sarasota budget, the city budget, half of it goes to the police. And we have seen a kind of a militarization of police in the United States in terms of the kind of gear they use. Do you see an opportunity, if you've looked at the budget, do you see an opportunity to put some resources into safety measures or things to address domestic violence or addiction, where resources going into policing might be better spent somewhere else? And Martin, I know you want to respond, so start with you, but that's my question.
So as far as techniques is concerned, and Bernadette DePino, she backed back because she didn't like the way that it came out in the moment. But yeah, my son was trained relatively recently in the last 10 years. That is a straightforward takedown technique. It's a three-step technique. They're not supposed to keep their knee on someone's neck. That's the distinction that makes a difference. But for Bernadette DePino say they're not trained like that, for a start, Sarasota Police Department does not train its officers to get regulated or certificated by FDLE. That's done elsewhere. And they still do train in these restraint techniques. So, I understand the moment. I understand what she was trying to say and deflect. As far as what you can see on that video, we'll have to agree to disagree on that. Getting back to defunding the police, I agree. Again, it's another important distinction. We're not talking about, for the most part, apart from crazy places like Seattle and Minneapolis, actually abolishing the police department. But why? On what basis? On the basis that we can hug it out better. I mean, addiction, mental health, these are all tremendous issues. I lost a member of staff here very recently to a drug addiction problem, which is frankly, I believe, linked to mental health issues. So absolutely, I believe in extra resources for that. But that's not the same as diminishing resources for the police. This idea that it's militarization, I'm sure a lot of people feel like, cops look scary, but, the streets are scary. We have over 300 million guns in this country, and they're not all in the hands of good people. The idea that you'd send someone in with a knife to a gunfight doesn't make any sense. You wouldn't have any cops. And then people would be sorry. So I'm a complete flip as far as that's going. I don't want people going and beating people with nightsticks and scaring people. But on the other hand, I want to make sure that they have everything that they need to protect themselves. And to a certain extent, there is a deterrent if you know that the people that are coming are fully armed. So the idea that we're going to go back to talking it out, that would end very, very badly.